Namaskar, Nileshok. In another episode related to ancient Indian civilization, let's jump into the presentation itself. The title I have given for this episode is Bankruptcy of Purvapaksha as it relates to the subject of dating of Mahabharata war. Now, this is a continuation of the email that I received from one individual seeker, NB. Those are his initials, and it was a long letter. I did cover portion of it as it related to one piece of astronomy evidence from the 18th and the last day of the Mahabharata war from the Mahabharata text, and that was done in one of the previous episodes. If you have not seen it, you may go back and watch that episode. That episode stands independent of this, so it's not a requirement that you have to watch that episode in order to understand what I am going to discuss here. The NB raised many different questions, and I am taking this second question from his long letter. So where he writes, Nilesh sir, Vedvirji has done, and this was in the context of the debate that I had with Sri Vedvir Aryaji, hosted by HyperQuest, Vishal Chaurasia ji, and that link, not link, but the front page of that is to the right of the screen there. Nilesh Oak versus Vedvir Arya, Mahabharata date is not what you think, and there we debated the year 5561 BCE against 3162 BCE, or just to have an apples to apples comparison, in fact 3163 BCE. Either we call it minus 5560 versus minus 3162, or it is for consistency's sake important to call it 5561 BCE versus 3163 BCE. Anyways, but what I'm discussing today is related to this, very critical, but not about a specific year, because in fact this is about doing a Purvapaksha of all, or at least the significant previous efforts before jumping into anyone doing one's own research. Now, this is in this case we are going to look at the Purvapaksha done by Sri Vedvir Aryaji. So NB writes, Nilesh sir, Vedvirji has done a detailed summary and Purvapaksha of the history of Mahabharata dating research. And then he writes, I still fail to understand the clear differences between who did what and what should be the correct approach. Is there any paper or book I can read that provides details of Purvapaksha? And by that I understand that he means details of Purvapaksha about the dating of Mahabharata, not the details of Purvapaksha of Vedvir Aryaji, because whatever he wanted to do, it's there in that paper. That's what I assume anyways. Also, NB is asking actually two questions there. Okay, one is understanding Purvapaksha as to who did what in the past, but then he also says, and what should be the correct approach. I am going to take what should be the correct approach as out of scope for this episode, okay, because it cannot be combined into the two, into one, and in fact, there is a lot to discuss there. In addition, it can create confusion as to which part is what is done by the past researchers and which part is the correct approach, who is using correct approach, who is not using correct approach. And you know what, this is not a black and white picture, okay. Sometimes some people use correct approach and then they give it up and lots of fun. Anyways, So what I thought I will do, after reading this, I went back to the paper that NB has sent me, written by Vedvira Reji, where he has done a quick summary of Purvapaksha. Okay, well, a quick summary, or rather Purvapaksha, in a very summarized form. And everyone has a choice, everyone has a limitation. Frankly, I think, at least in this specific case, after reading 130 plus different claims and significant material, original books and papers by many, I would say close to 50 plus at least, okay, uh, distinct Mahabharata dating researchers, I consider, I mean, if I have to summarize it, I mean, we can go in details, but if I have to summarize it, it's a colossal nonsense, failures, and driven by, at times, not always, at times, extremely sincere desire, but then severe incompetency that is very visible, very obvious. Other times, you can sense the agenda, like the agenda, very likely for popularity, like, hey, me too, I also did something, or, and then, if everyone is playing this game, why not, why I should not play the game, that kind of mentality, and just come up with another date, and just in a jingoistic fashion, in a marketing fashion, keep on promoting it. That's the kind of summary. And I know it's not a very good summary, but that's how messy, incompetent, idiotic, emotional this business is, this landscape is, of the dating of Mahabharat war. Now, I'm not saying this with a pleasure, or I'm not saying this with uh, with the idea of putting others down. I'm saying this with a very sincere aim to let people, ordinary folks, decision makers, other researchers, future researchers, know that the reality that exists in this landscape of the efforts made to date the year of Mahabharat war. Let's look at the Purvapaksha done by Sri Vedviraryaji. Now, my comments are specifically to what he has written, but let me tell you that they do apply to many other researchers. Okay, I would say, to his credit, at least he has made a succinct summary of this Purvapaksha, so at least it can be critiqued. I mean, to critique something, there has to be some sensible write up. And to his credit, I will say it is the case, and therefore it is easy to critique. Okay, so let's begin. From his paper, I have just taken some snapshots. An overview of the studies on dating of the Mahabharata war. The research on the dating of the Mahabharata war can be categorized into the following four groups. Okay, let's look at them. Number one, traditional date, 32nd century BCE. Okay, T.S. Narayana Shastri, Kota Venkatachalam, and several other scholars adhere to the traditional Puranic chronology of the Magadha Empire, spanning from the Bhadratha dynasty to the Gupta dynasty. They proposed a date for the Mahabharata war around 3138 BCE, referencing the traditional dates, and we'll see what's on the next screen. But before even I go there, let me comment, or let me assert, that what Sri Vedvir Aryaji has said here is actually factually not correct. I mean, he's simply doing a Purvapaksha of what these folks have done, but even this is not true. The reason I say this, and I want to keep it as short as I can, but this is how messy this stuff is. For example, Kota Venkatachalam, we can take that as an example. T.S. Narayana Shastri is not that simple, not that easy. Okay, sometime I will just take his paper by T.S. Narayana Shastri and make a separate episode and say how confusing that particular paper is. But Kota Venkatachalam, for example, what he did he looked at certain Puranas, looked at certain Puranic chronology of the Magadha Empire, and yes, that is true, spanning from Brihadratha dynasty to Gupta dynasty and so on. But was Sri Kota Venkatachalamji exhaustive in looking at all Puranic chronology? The answer is decisive no. Therefore, we cannot say that even he is truly taking the traditional chronology evidence, Kota Venkatachalamji. He is not. He is taking a selective chronology evidence from Puranic chronology, which led him to a certain date, or maybe he had a date in his mind, again driven by this so called historical Kali Yuga date. Okay, that is a nonsense by itself, but that would require a separate episode. T.S. Narayana Shastri, as I said, we will deal with it separately for good reasons. The only point I want to make is that Kota Venkatachalamji did use one date, which is 3102 BCE, as at his time, let's say, the not accepted, but at least one of the floating date for the beginning of Kali Yuga. And then what he did, he used the Puranic, from Bhagavad Puran, or even Vishnu Puran, the reference that when Krishna passed away, Kali Yuga began. And so, since Kali Yuga began 3102 BC, that is when Krishna passed away, and then Mahabharata text. So far, no Mahabharata involved, okay? 3102 BC, there is nothing in the Mahabharata that will take anyone to anywhere close to 3102 BC plus minus 1000 years. So the assumption of Kali Yuga has nothing. The assumption of Kali Yuga beginning 3102 BC has nothing, nada, absolutely nothing to do with anything that is inside the Mahabharata text. So this is a standalone floating reference. It is a subject for its own independent investigation, but that's what Kota Venkatachalamji began with. Then selectively he goes to take one reference from the Mahabharata text, which said that after the Mahabharata war, 36 years after the Mahabharata war, Krishna's Dwarka was flooded and destroyed, and also Krishna passed away. So now what he does essentially is that he takes 3102 BCE, and to that he adds going backwards 36 years, and that takes us to 3138 BCE. That's it, guys. That's the crux of it, how he arrived at 3138 BCE. And now what he has done is he has looked at the Puranic genealogy, adjusted years as required here and there with some justification to justify 3138 BCE. That's it, guys. So let no one give you this false impression that the Puranic chronology was used in an objective fashion. In fact, it was not exhaustive. It was a cherry-picked Puranic chronology. For example, this Skanda Purana reference of the total duration of 3,310 years between Parikshit and Mahapadmananda was ignored. So how can we say that it was exhaustive? Okay, but so the 3138 BC was already arrived based on simply two references, that the Kali Yuga began in 3102 BCE, a subject of investigation by itself, and then taking one reference, selective cherry-picked reference from the Mahabharata text, that Krishna passed away 36 years after the Mahabharata war, and that is the same time Dwarka was destroyed. And simply that 36 was added backwards to this 3102 BC, that takes one to 3138 BC. Bingo, done. That's the year of Mahabharata war. So rest of the stuff that was done to basically in a tortuous way to justify 3138 BC, I consider this is very important that people understand it. Kota Venkatachalamji in 1950s did tremendous work when possibly not much work existed. I was not there, I don't know. He has done a lot of hard work, meticulous documentation, has written many books. I have practically all of them. I have read them multiple times. So what I am saying is after reading them multiple times. Okay, let's go to the next one. The continuation of that first one, it says referencing the traditional dates of historical figures such as Buddha, 19th century BC. Well, he came to that, but I mean, Kota Venkateswaramji proposed Buddhas in 19th century BCE, and he may have his own evidence and reasons, and they can be read in his book. But my point is, it's not like he started with Buddha's date at 19th century BC. No, he simply started with Kali Yuga beginning in 3102 BC, added 36 years based on a Mahabharata cherry picked evidence of Krishna passing away 36 years after the Mahabharata war, Bhagavad Purana cherry picked reference of Kali Yuga beginning when Krishna passing away, and arrived at 3138 BC. Now, to support that, he also looked at the chronology of other figures such as Buddha and Adi Shankaracharya and so on. And then not later Kali Yuga calendar epoch. No, that was his starting point. Okay, then Redvirji says, in contrast, Professor Srinivas Raghavan and Professor B.N. Narari HR assigned a date of 3067 BC based on their analysis of internal astronomy evidence. This is a partial truth, guys. Okay, let's forget B.N. Narari HR for a minute. It was Professor Srinivas Raghavan in 1969 began with the exactly same point Kota Venkateswaramji began, namely the Kali Yuga beginning occurred in 3101 or 3102 BCE. And then he said, hey, we must look into the vicinity of this date, looking for the birth time of Bhagwan Krishna or the birth year of Bhagwan Krishna, and so on and so forth. And then essentially hit and miss kind of mumbo jumbo analysis, specifically based on a very erroneous cherry picked evidence related to Bhishma Nirvana. Even there, they have, I mean, Professor Srinivas Raghavan has done blunders of multiple blunders, series of blunders, to and then finally arrive at 3067 BCE. This is in 1969. Professor B.N. Narari HR did not touch this date, was not even aware of this date until late 1990s when Dr. Srinivas Kalyan Ramanji brought it to the attention of Narari HR, asked him to check, validate, and instead of realizing that what a colossal failure nonsense this was, Professor B.N. Narari Achar went on to justify why 3067 is the correct date. It is not based on any internal astronomy evidence. Now, Professor Srinivas Raghavan did use internal evidence to justify his 3067 BC. Even to be fair, we may give him a credit that he did use cherry picked internal evidence from the Mahabharata text related to Bhishma Nirvana to arrive at 3067 BCE. Or also, one additional reference is Saturn near Rohini. Now, the actual reference says Saturn was giving Pida to Rohini, and to be fair to him again, if he took that to mean Saturn is near Rohini as a prima facie, okay, it is a justified assumption, and so he used that, and then he tried to take additional cherry picked evidence related to Bhishma Nirvana. Again, that itself was a disaster, the cherry picked evidence of Bhishma Nirvana. It does not match, even the evidence he picked does not match for his date. What a tragedy. Okay, but that's the situation. And then Professor Narari HR simply justified. I mean, all his role was to simply justify, remove the evidence supposedly used by Professor K.S. Raghavan, which became troublesome in Dr. Narari Achar's mind. Okay, all the evidence that is used is troublesome. None of the evidence used either by Professor K.S. Raghavan or Professor Narari Achar will lead anyone to 3067 BCE. Well, guys, I have gone on the record many times saying there is not even a single piece of evidence, either a single piece or single set of evidence in the entire Mahabharata text that will allow anyone to go anywhere close to 3000 BCE plus minus 1000 years, namely from 4000 BC to 2000 BC. Anything in between is simply not possible. It's my open challenge. I'm waiting for somebody, and there are many folks in this 3000 BCE bracket, to come forward and show me which specific evidence or a specific set of evidence from the Mahabharata text allowed them to arrive at 3000 BCE plus minus 1000 years. Okay, let's go to the number 2. The date between 1900 and 1400 BCE. Here, Vedvir Areji writes, Dr. Subhash Kak, Professor R.N. Iyengar, Ashok K. Bhatnagar and others have adhered to the date of Buddha Nirvana as established by contemporary historians based on their analysis, Based on their analysis of both internal and external evidence, they have determined that the date of Mahabharata war falls between 1900 BC and 1400 BCE. This is also not correct. For example, Dr. Subhash Kak, he referred to two dates. One date that 1900 BC, so this is partially correct, based on the drying up of Saraswati river. Definitely dried up, and at the time of Mahabharata war, it was flowing in some fashion. So therefore he said Mahabharata war around 1900 BC or before 1900 BC. Then he also went back to the traditional claim, again so-called the beginning of Kali Yuga, 3102 BCE, and then again kind of adding that 3600 years, 3102 versus 3101 plus 36, and therefore he suggested 3137 BCE as the another possible claim for the year of Mahabharata war. No additional evidence from the Mahabharata text or even outside was made use of by Dr. Subhash Kak in arriving at either 1900 BCE or 3137 BCE. Okay, nothing to do with the Buddha Nirvana, guys. Professor R.N. Iyengar, well, let's see. Okay, Professor R.N. Iyengar proposing 1478 BCE is another story. If anyone thinks he started with the Buddha Nirvana and therefore he arrived at this, absolutely not. Professor R.N. Iyengar had more emphasis on the Iron Age, okay, because Mahabharata mentions irons and there better be iron when the Mahabharata happened. And again, here actually it is a illogical thinking, because the illogical or the fallacious or fallacy that is there is absence of evidence is evidence of absence, as we know recently. But even before that, the Iron Age was decided in a very faulty, illogical, unscientific manner. So for example, what is the oldest iron found in India? Iron object, let's say. And so if it was 200 BC, then they said Iron Age is 200 BC. When something was found going back to 500 BC, they said Iron Age is 500 BC. Then they found something for 1200 BC. They said 1200 BC, 1800 BC, 2200 BC. And these days we are hearing, I forgot the exact date, in Tamil Nadu, 3000 BC or 4000 BC, that's right, 3000 BC or something like this, or 3300 BC. But Professor R.N. Iyengar was focused on Iron Age, and in his mind it has to be sometime only after say 1800 BC, and that's why he stuck with 1478 BC. As to specifically how he arrived at this date, I don't have the details in front of me. I have done 4 or 5 different parts critiquing his work, his claim of 1478 BC, but essentially he took a claim of some Dr. Sharma, Professor Sharma. I'm not getting the name correct right now, but it's in my videos and anyone can look at his research papers to find out that name, who had proposed 1478 BCE or in that 1500 BCE area, because it fitted Professor R.N. Iyengar's subjective judgment about the timing of Iron Age. He took that date and then tried to justify and failed miserably. That's the reality, guys. Failed miserably. In fact, none of the internal astronomy observation of the Mahabharata text matches for 1478. To the extent, so I don't know what how this Dr. Sharma or whoever came up with that date, but to the extent Professor R.N. Iyengar had to propose all kinds of patchworks, such as the observations that are described as if happening at the time of Mahabharata war are actually not from the time of Mahabharata war, but maybe 14 years before, and so on and so forth. Quickly, the date between 900 to 1100 BCE. Here, B.B. Lal and others have dated the Mahabharata war to approximately 2000 BCE based on archaeological study of the cities mentioned in the text of Mahabharata. This is a decent summary, but if a novice listens to it or reads it, he or she is going to think, oh, so you know. B.B. Lal, what he has done, oh nice, yeah, looked at archaeology, wow, and looking at the cities of the text of Mahabharata. No, the reality is far from it. Actually, it's a extremely faulty reasoning, extremely faulty triangulation, and as far as the scientific logic is concerned, there is none. Okay, I think Vedvir Areji mentions it further, so I will refer to that, but let me go further. Quickly, the point 4 that is related to the claim of 5561 BCE. Vedvir Areji writes, P.V. Vartak and Nilesh Oak have dated the Mahabharata war to 5561 BC. This part is correct, independently of traditional and chronological evidence based on their analysis of Arundhati Vasishta observation. Independent of traditional and chronological evidence is true for me, that is namely Nilesh Oak, because I did not take help of any traditional or any chronological evidence outside Mahabharata text to arrive at 5561 BC. That is not the case in the case of Dr. P.V. Vartak. P.V. Vartak, in fact, made use of all possible traditional, epigraphic, chronology, Purana, you name it. Okay, even the outsiders records like Megasthenes and so on. So if a evidence existed and if it can be connected in some fashion to Mahabharata, he has done it. Now, I'm not saying all his work is correct, but is the most exhaustive work that I am aware of, and nobody else comes anywhere close to what he has done. But did he do it independent of tradition and chronological evidence? That's not correct. That only applies to me. The next part that Vedvir Areji writes, based on their analysis of Arundhati Vasishta observation, is decisively false. This is not correct. For first thing, this is not correct at all in case of Dr. P.V. Vartak, because he could not solve the problem of Arundhati Vasishta. So where comes the question of he determining 5561 BC based on Arundhati Vasishta observation? And to say that I came to 5561 BC based on Arundhati Vasishta observation alone is also to basically misrepresent my work. Okay, so therefore that is also not correct. Arundhati Vasishta observation is exactly where I started, and it gave me a boundary and it gave me a decisive time limit, such as nothing is possible. Mahabharata war is not possible anytime after 4500 BC, and it's not possible anytime before 11,000 BC. That's the great input, a decisive input from Arundhati Vasishta observation. However, the determination of 5561 BCE is based on 300 plus internal astronomy evidence of the Mahabharata text and only internal astronomy evidence of Mahabharata text. Although now Vedvirji writes, although the date of 3138 BC is broadly consistent with the traditional chronology, it does not align with the internal astronomical evidence. That is correct. Consequently, some scholars have proposed alternative dates for Mahabharata war, like Jayashree Sarnathan 3136 BC, 3139 BC by Saroj Bala, and 3143 BC by P.V. Hole, based on their analysis of the internal astronomy data. This is not correct. Okay, so they did not like 3138 BC. In fact, the story is not that simple at all in any of the three cases. But I don't want to spend too much time on this, just saying that this is not, they did not deviate based on the internal analysis of astronomy data. they did not like 3138 BC because there was nobody had made any use of internal evidence with the exception of 36 years. So they wanted to see if they can look at additional astronomy data or additional data internal to Mahabharata and try to see if you try to fit it. And when they tried to do it, they realized 3138 BC would not accommodate that. So slight variation they thought is acceptable, like 3136. Look at those numbers, 3139, just a slight deviation from 3138. And even PV whole is 3143. So this was that attempt to match additional cherry picked data. Okay guys, so that's what it is. It's not like some detailed analysis of internal astronomy data. No, that's not correct. Professor Srinivas Raghavan, BN Narar HR, and Manish Pandit determined the date to be 3067 BCE, considering the occultation of Rohini by Saturn and the occurrence of an eclipse pair in the year of Mahabharata war. As I already showed, that's not the case. Actually, Srinivas Raghavan, very ad hoc basis, started with Kali Yuga in 3102 BCE. Then he used Saturn near Rohini. He used some cherry-picked reference evidence for Bhishma Nirvana, came up with 3067 BC, and then frankly this additional eclipse pair and all that is basically to give some additional support. Okay, this is not how he arrived at 3067 BCE. As I repeat, there is not even a single piece of evidence in the Mahabharata text that can take you to 3000 BC plus minus 1000 years. S. Balakrishna proposed the date of 3128 BC. Well, again, he already decided a certain area, then tried to look for this two eclipses occurring in less than 13 days and so on, and come up with a couple of dates. Disregarding the epoch of Kali Yuga calendar traditional chronology, Professor R.N. Iyengar conducted a systematic examination by verifying all double eclipses from 501 to 3000 BCE. Yes, he did a systematic examination of eclipses, but he was already gung-ho on a specific time limit, which is 1400 1500 BCE. Also, why did he limit himself to 3000 BCE? Okay, anyways, let's move further. And analyzing the proximity of Saturn and Jupiter to Vishaka, well, I would encourage people to read his original papers to see how much truth is there in this. He concluded 1478 BC, that is correct, meaning he did conclude that, which is wrong, of course. Okay. Then Ashok Bhatnagar suggested a date of 1793, focusing on the seasons, the location of equinoxes and solstices, a pair of eclipses, and other astronomical events referenced in the Mahabharata text. This is not correct at all. All Ashok Bhatnagar ji did is he had a certain area in mind, but just to summarize it, he looked at a cherry-picked evidence related to Bhishma Nirvana of Bhishma lying on the bed of arrows for 58 days from the 10th day of the war, and he passing away on Magha Shukla Ashtami, which is an interpretation of Nilakantha Chaturdhar of 17th century. It doesn't exist before that. And so based on that, this is the only reference. These two references are the only two references that Ashok Bhatnagar ji used. He did not refer to any other astronomical event, and the rest of the stuff about the seasons, location of equinoxes, solstices, they are pair of eclipses. They are, by the way, wrong, but it is all there to support his conjecture. There is no factual basis for that. Okay, quickly. Dr. Subhashka considered a gap of 1500 years. No, I already explained that. No, that's not what he went on. He might have mentioned this again in justification of his 1900 BC or 3137 BC, but that is more of an afterthought, like bringing additional corroborative evidence for the claim that he arrived independently. Okay, this is very important. So yes, he would have made use of 1500 years in arriving at 3137 BCE, but don't forget that was a traditional claim, 3138 BCE based on 3101 BC to begin with. Okay, then Bibi Lal conducted excavation at Indraprastha and Hastinapur during the years, and he found certain objects like a PGW, and because all the PGW could be found in those locations, so he said, these locations are related to Mahabharata. I am finding the similar object. This must be the time of Mahabharata. This is the blunder. Okay, there is no science in this. There is no logic in this. But with whatever bare minimum things that he had, he arrived at that date, which fortunately, as Dr. Vamadev Shastri, David Frology explained at the symposium, international symposium we had in Vishakhapatnam a year ago, that to his credit and to his knowledge, Professor B.B. Lal and also S.R. Rao retracted their claims later on. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist in any written records of theirs. And quickly, the last one about Professor S.R. Rao. And here Vedviraraj is claiming that that led to 1900 1700 BC. Again, I have not seen this reference. I mean, I have heard S.R. Rao referring to Mahabharata happening around in the same area, and what by same area I don't know what he meant. But if it is 1900 1700 BC, then let me tell you, I have read his interviews, and the things that he found at Bet Dwarka and the dating of them is nowhere close to 1900 and 1700 BC. So I truly don't understand how S.R. Rao arrived at 1900 1700 BC. So on that I will just stop. Okay, so my books, but I have shown them many times. I don't need to do that. This is a quick, you can say, Purvapaksha of a Purvapaksha of Vedviraryaji. I hope you find this useful. This is how messy this space is, guys. Okay, so don't take just like read something and imagine immediately you're going to know. If you want to know the truth, you must be heavily invested in going into the nitty gritty details. Okay, talk to you soon in another episode. Namaskar.